Okay. So in Lemony Snicket's The Latka Who Couldn't Stop Screaming, a Latka jumps out of a frying pan of boiling hot oil and escapes. In its travels, it meets a pine tree, fairy lights, and candy cane. And it tries somewhat unsuccessfully to explain that it's not hash browns, nor is it a present to be placed under a tree, and it has nothing to do with Santa Claus. Eventually, the latka is found by a family who understands exactly what a latka is, and spoiler alert, eaten. Well, this is Lemony Snicket. It's a cute kid's book, and it's worth taking 5 or 10 minutes to read it because it has a profound underlying message. But on the surface, it deals with the latka's frustration in trying to explain what Chanukah is, or at least what it's not. That is, it's not the Jewish Christmas. But the truth is, it's not only latkas who have this issue, and it's not only vis-a-vis Christmas, because Chanukah is actually a very enigmatic festival. If I ask you, what does Pesach commemorate? And I know you're on mute, but I gave the SHIUR on Thursday live, so I'll tell you the answers that I got when I gave live, and everybody immediately said the Exodus from Egypt. What does Shavuot commemorate? Matan Torah. And I asked about Purim, and they all said that we were saved from annihilation. And then I said, what does Chanukah commemorate? And there wasn't consensus. It took a little while. And there's a reason for this. Because when we actually start digging deep and peeling away layers, what is Chanukah all about? So during Chanukah, we add a whole lengthy insertion into the Shemona Esrei. And I'll read it in English, even though it's lengthy, because that's the point. And it says, and we praise you for the miracles and for the redemption and for the mighty deeds and for the victories and for the battles that you performed for our fathers in those days at this time. In the days of Matisyahu, the son of Yochanan, the high priest, the Hasmonean, and his sons, when the wicked kingdom of Greece rose up against your people Israel to make them forget your Torah and to stray from the laws of your will, you, with great mercy, stood by them in the time of their distress. You fought their fight, judged their cause, and avenged them with vengeance. You delivered the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and the arrogant into the hands of those engaged with your Torah. For yourself you made a great and holy name in your world. You performed a great deliverance for your people Israel on this day. After these things, your children entered into the Holy of Holies of your house, cleansed your temple, purified the place of your holiness, kindled lights in your holy courts, and established these 8 days of Chanukah to express thanksgiving and praise to your great name. Now we should have a question on this. It's speaking about the battles, and yes, it was a great military victory. But what happened? I thought Chanukah was about the oil, the donuts, the clogged arteries. There's no mention of the miracle of the oil. So for this, we have to look in the Gemara. And there it says, what is Chanukah? The sages taught on the 25th of Kislev, the days of Chanukah 8, one may not eulogize on them, and one may not fast on them. When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they divided all the oils that were in the sanctuary, and when the Hasmoneans overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found 1 cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest. And there was enough oil for 1 day. A miracle occurred, and they lit it from 8 days. The next year, the sages instituted those days and made them holidays with Hallel and thanksgiving and prayer and blessings. And yet the Gemara, which I just read to you, doesn't mention the military battle at all. Focuses only on the oil. So what is this all about? And more importantly, what message, what can I take out of it as I try and navigate my life in 2023? Needless to say, there are many explanations given, but we're going to focus on one, Be'ezras Hashem. So what is the concept of a miracle? Before we look at this, it's worth reminding ourselves that actually everything is a miracle. In truth, there's no difference between that which is natural and that which is miraculous. Everything is a miracle. Everything exists because Hashem wills it into existence. And Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa was someone who lived his life like this. And the Talmud tells us that one Friday night he sees his daughter is very upset. And he says, what's wrong? And she said when she took the jug to fill the lantern to light the Shabbat candles, she filled the candles by mistake with vinegar instead of oil. And Rabbi Hanina says, well, Why are you so worried? He said, the one who causes and says that oil will burn, so he will also say vinegar will burn. And the Talmud tells us that the Shabbat candles stayed lit until the entire Shabbat. It's only because natural events occur every day that we take them for granted. Consider, if we think about it, after the exodus from Egypt, when the Jews were in the desert, manna would rain down every day, and that's how they would eat. Now imagine a child born during the 40 years in the desert and saw that how did he get food? It came down from heaven. That child now enters Eretz Israel and sees that if you want something to eat, you take this little round thing called a seed and you dig it in the ground and you cover it with earth and you pour water, and you water it, and all of a sudden this beautiful green amazing plant grows. And then not only that, you take it and you grind it, etc., and you have bread. Wow, that's a miracle. And as an aside, what I find very helpful, especially as we're navigating these days, the world that we're living in, which is seeming this very toxic environment, and it's got a potential to bring us down, is to every so often, whether it's once a day, once a week, but just to focus on the everyday miracles in our lives. What do I mean by this? When I had chemotherapy, there was a certain period where I was struggling to breathe. And it took them a week to find a diagnosis and to put me on the correct medicine so I could breathe easily again. And I remember when I could breathe again, I was just, Baruch Hashem, this is a miracle. I can breathe. And I thought I would never take breathing for granted again. Like every time I would take a breath, I assumed I'd say Baruch Hashem. But you know what? It's human nature. We take things for granted. But by trying to focus during this time on just like one little miracle in our life, if just as I said, once a day, once a week, whatever it is, I try to take, say, before I'm about to bite into a fruit, or in the morning before I say the bracha of Pokeach Ivrim, just to take a few moments to think about the miracle, to think about how a fruit grows, a sense of taste, and then to remember Hashem made that miracle for me. It's not just saying thank you. It's deeper. It's thinking of the miracle, and that miracle leads us to a deep sense of gratitude, and that leads to joy. And when we go through life with the eyes of a child, with that freshness, so to speak, it leads to a deeper gratitude, our enthusiasm, our love of life is just fresh and strong. But anyway, getting back to our question, what is a miracle? That which we call a nes in Hebrew. So Hashem created nature with certain rules and patterns, what we call the natural order. So, for example, the earth rotates on its axis from west to east. If I've got a pen here, if I have to let go of it, gravity will cause it to drop to the ground. Teenagers always know better than their parents. These are laws and nature, and that's what we call derech hateva. Now, these laws, these patterns, they remain fixed. However, when they're suspended to allow for a change in nature, we call it a nes. We call it a miracle. Now, the word nes translates as to lift up or to exalt. So a nes, also, if you think of, in Hebrew, a flagpole that has a banner, that is also called a nes. A nes is something that exalts, it elevates, it inspires. So if we think of the splitting of the Red Sea, that was a nes, that was a miracle, and that was something that it inspires, it exalted, it lifted us up. Notwithstanding that, Hashem prefers, so to speak, to run the world according to the laws of nature. So one of the classic questions regarding the story of Chanukah is the miracle of the oil. As we said earlier when we quoted the Gemara, is that the Greeks had defiled the Beit HaMikdash, and the Jews came in, the Hasmoneans came in, and they wanted to light the menorah. And they found everything had been desecrated and defiled, but they found one little cruse of oil that was still pure. And that was enough for one day, but instead there was a miracle, and the oil lasted for 8 days, which was enough time for them to get more new pure oil that could be manufactured and delivered. Now, we've just said, though, that miracles are not performed for miracle's sake, and that Hashem prefers that the normal way of the world, that the world runs according to Derech HaTeva, and he changes it only when absolutely imperative. Why then, after the Jews, as I read to you in that lengthy insertion, had such an overwhelming victory against all odds, when it was such a cause for celebration, such a triumph, why was it necessary then to have a miracle of the oil? Also, during the entire period of the Greek invasion, the menorah wasn't lit. So why was there this need all of a sudden to have it to light it? Fine, so they had enough for one night, light it, and then wait until they could get new more oil, as they say in the vernacular, savlanut. Even more pointedly, Rav Yosef Karo in his Beit Yosef asks, when the Jews reconquered the Beit HaMikdash, we said they found a cruse of oil, which was enough for one day. So why is the miracle 8 days? Why do we celebrate a miracle for 8 days when we already had oil for one night? We should celebrate it for 7 because the miracle was 7 days. And he answers, he gives 3 explanations to this. Subsequent thinkers have said more. There was a book printed in 1962, Ner Lamer, which gave 100 answers to this question. And more recently, there's a book being printed that gives 500 answers to this question. Talk about 2 Jews, 3 opinions. But one of the famous answers to this question of why is the miracle 8 and not 7 is that we celebrate having found a cruse of pure oil. So one day we celebrate having found that oil in the first place. But if that's the case, and we say that Hashem prefers to run the world as naturally as possible, why couldn't Hashem just have engineered it that they found 8 little crucibles of oil, and then we wouldn't have had to have this miracle? So why take 1 and extend it for 8? So let's just recap the questions. Why was this miracle necessary at all? Surely this manifestly miraculous military victory of the Jews against the Greeks was sufficient cause for celebration. And now let's just remember what this means. I mean, we might be thinking of the IDF and their intensive training and Be'ezras Hashem, Hashem should send all our Chayalim now, should be safe and come home safely. But we have the IDF, Baruch Hashem, we have the Iron Dome. It wasn't like that. What we had was a handful at the time of emaciated men with no military training. They were fighting with farming implements and whatever rudimentary weapons such as slings that they could make. And they took on the superpower of the time. I mean, the Greeks had elephants. Elephants are big. Alternatively, why couldn't a few more crucibles have been divinely protected? So we would have had 8, we would have had enough oil, and then we wouldn't have had a need for this miracle at all. In any case, if the menorah had not been lit through the entire period of this Greek control and invasion, why was there necessity for it to be lit now? So I'm very excited. I'm going to share a beautiful idea with you from the Maharal. The Maharal, actually, he died at the early part of the 17th century. If you go to Prague today, you can still see his synagogue, because when the Nazis invaded Czech, they didn't actually destroy this shul because they wanted to keep it as a museum. They had plans to wipe out Chas v'Shalom, but they had plans to wipe out all the Jews, and they planned to have a museum of that there was once a nation called the Jewish nation. So you can actually go today and see his synagogue, which is intact. But anyway, he explains that the Midrash addresses these questions and gives us this insight into the Greek essence of the Greek Empire. So it's a very obscure Midrash. So if it's all Greek to you, don't worry, we're going to decipher it together. And I apologize. I'm one of those people, I know I just used a pun and then people say no pun intended. I really didn't mean it. But when I was writing this, I was trying to think of the best word, confusing this or that. And if it's all Greek to you, just worked perfectly. So in Sefer Bereshit, in the formative verses of the Torah, and it says, speaking about the creation, and it says that the earth was tohu v'choshech al pnei saham, that the earth was desertly empty with darkness upon the surface of the deep. And Rav Shimon ben Lakish says that these four references, this desolately empty with darkness on the surface of the deep, refers to the four exiles that we as a nation have endured. So we've got the Babylonian, the Persian, the Greek, and the Roman exile. And he said that this choshech, this darkness, refers specifically to the Greek exile because the Greeks darkened the eyes of Israel with the decrees, and they said, Kisvi lachem al keren hashar she'ein lachem chelek be'elokei Yisrael. Write for yourself on the horns of an ox that you have no portion in the God of Israel. So the Midrash seems to be teaching that Greece is specifically synonymous with darkness because they darkened Israel's eyes, with their decrees. So this is strange. Firstly, what made Greece more associated with darkness than any of the other exiles? Let's call a spade a spade. None of the exiles have been a walk in the park. But even more puzzling is the continuation of the Midrash, where it says, write for yourself, write on the ox's horn, that you have no portion in the God of Israel. What a strange place to write this. We have WhatsApp, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, now known as X. Go write on a horn of an ox. That's where you're going to write your credo and your manifesto. Lest you think that a horn's ox was the WhatsApp of the time. It wasn't. A few years ago, actually, it was a little while ago, quite a number of years ago. I wouldn't make the same mistake today. But I sent my nephew an email birthday card. It was one of those animated singing, dancing, flashing email birthday cards, and he didn't respond. And he's quite a polite boy, so I was surprised. And I asked my sister-in-law, I said, did he receive the birthday card? So she said to me, how did you send it? So I said, by email. And she said, oh, Deborah, she said, email is so last century. She said, you can't email teenagers. They use WhatsApp. So I don't know. I mean, I'm dating myself now. But when I went to Israel for 2 years after high school, I studied in seminary there, and my parents would send faxes. My granny would write me an aerogram every 2 weeks. My sister was quite hip. She was quite with the time. She used to type a letter for me, put some clip art on it, and then print it out on a dot matrix printer. Those were the days. But what we have to understand is that an ox's horn was not the aerogram email or WhatsApp of the day. So why did they do this? We can analyze it in a few ways. And the Maharal says, what was the Greeks' intention when they invaded Israel? When the Greeks set out, it was not like Haman or Hitler or Hamas Yimach Shemam. It wasn't, the intention was not to destroy the Jews. And it was not like the Egyptians to enslave us. They set out entirely to change the Jews. When they first attempted to overthrow Israel, it was the mission to tear us away from our practices, to change their practices, to change their way of life. There was no stated intention of destroying the people physically. Rather, their stated aim and objective was to take away the pillars of our observance. The Greeks famously decreed against 3 specific mitzvahs: Brit Milah, Shabbat, and Rosh Chodesh. They also put a ban on learning Torah Sheba'al Peh and put a stop to our Avodah service in the Beit HaMikdash. So the goal was to take away things that made us unique, chosen, different. Specifically, Shabbat and Brit Milah are regarded as a covenant between us and Hashem. But more than that, all of those things that they sought to destroy all have one common theme of Kedusha, of holiness. The Greeks likewise sought to destroy the holiness of our nation of Israel in every part of physical reality, in person, time, and space. If you think of it, Brit Milah sanctifies the person. And while that might apply to men, there was also a decree that a woman on her wedding night had to first go to the Greek governor and he would violate her. Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh sanctify time. Now, Shabbat, Hashem sanctifies for us, but Rosh Chodesh, he has given over to us to sanctify. And obviously, when the day that Rosh Chodesh determines the days of the Chagim. So much so that there's a midrash that says that the angels go to Hashem and say, when's Rosh Hashanah? And Hashem says, why are you asking me? Go down, come, let's go down to the heavenly court and ask them. Finally, the Beit HaMikdash sanctifies place, as we said that the Shekhinah, Hashem's presence, rested upon us. So the Greeks set out to destroy Judaism by imposing a ban on these 3 mitzvot. Take away their distinction. Let's make them like us. And they took over the Beit HaMikdash, and they offered up a pig on the altar. Says the Maharal, our greatest sign of our bond with Hashem is the Beit HaMikdash, our service and our direct link to Hashem. This service that we performed in the Beit HaMikdash, it highlights the unique bond between Klal Yisrael and Hashem. And it's very, very easy to misunderstand. When we bought a korban, these offerings to Hashem, it's not, people might think it was appeasing an angry God, or it's not like Hashem needs our gifts or we have to bribe him. And to our 21st century mind, it's very hard to get our head around this, especially we get to Vayikra and we read about the congealing of the fat and the splitting of the necks and the sprinkling of the blood, and it's easy to just think icky. And I give a shiur. I spend an hour just trying to explain it a little bit, and even that doesn't do it justice. So I'm going to attempt just though in one sentence just to say that what we offered on the Mizbeach represented the ultimate sign of our connection and unity with the Shekhinah. And this is manifest in the Beit HaMikdash. So that when we talk about a korban, which we translate as a sacrifice, really it comes from the word karov, to bring close. Okay, what is it? The key element, when we say the word sacrifice in English, we think of giving up something. But the word karov means to come close. But we brought something close to Hashem. What did we bring close? Ourselves. So this avodah was a focal point of our service to Hashem, and it was also the source of divine blessing. It was nothing less than the spiritual umbilical cord. Okay, it was providing this nurturing, life-sustaining spiritual nourishment. It was our connection, our point of being in touch with the divine. It was a service where we could elevate our human endeavor and bring it and raise it to divine service. And it's important to understand what this means, both when we had the Beit HaMikdash and today when we do not. I don't want you to relegate the Beit HaMikdash and the connection that we had to the same place as faxes and aerograms. True, we no longer have the Beit HaMikdash, but we're told today that our tefillah, our shachrit, mincha, our arvit, it takes the place of the offerings, but it doesn't have to be formal tefillah either. And I'll share a story with you that happened to me. I used to give a shiur at a program in Cape Town. I would give a shiur in the morning and a shiur in the evening. And I was driving, it was in a different area to where I was living at the time. And I was driving there one morning, and there were 3 lanes, and I needed to move into the middle lane. And as I moved into the middle lane, a car on the other side that had a trailer attached to it moved from the other lane into the middle lane, and the trailer smashed my car. Baruch Hashem, I was fine. My car wasn't. So I got to my shiur. I gave my shiur, and then I phoned the insurance company, and they said I had to go to the police station closest to where the accident took place and report it. So I went there, and the place closest was the police station at the harbour and near the waterfront. So when, Be'ezras Hashem, you come visit Cape Town, the waterfront is it's a shopping centre, hotels, it's this huge complex that's actually built on the harbour. So I went there, but first I needed to go to the bank because I had an investment that was maturing that day, and I wanted to take it from my bank to another bank because they had an offer for a much better annual investment. And I needed to change it because this was the last day that I could do it, but it was the first day that I could also do it. It was the last day of the special offer at the other bank, but it was the first day that I could do it because my investment had only matured that day. So I went to the bank and I wanted to open up this account, and they said I needed to go to my bank and get a check and bring it back to them. So I went to the other bank, to my bank now, to get my check. And I think that the person I was speaking to, a check to her was probably like an aerogram or a fax machine. I don't think she knew how to make out a check. And she said, no, rather do an EFT, which was an electronic funds transfer. I said, please just call the guy at the other bank because he said he wanted a check. So she phoned him. He said he wanted a check, but she absolutely insisted it will be so much better if we do this EFT. So fine, we do this EFT. I go back to the other bank. There's no money. So he called her. I said, I paid for it to be instantaneous. And she said, oh, well, instantaneous is sometimes 15 minutes. Waited 15 minutes, no money. Waited half an hour. I now have about 250,000 Rand is lost in cyberspace. Anyway, I couldn't wait any longer. I then went off to the police station, didn't realize how far I actually had to walk, waited at the police station, finally get to speak to them. And they said, no. They said, we're only the police station for the docks, only things that happen in the harbour. I had to go to the main police station in town. Now, let me just tell you, South African citizens are not the most law-abiding, and government departments in South Africa are not the most efficient. So I had these images of a line at this police station, of a line like stretching all the way out the police station down the road. Let me tell you, when I got there, my images, those visions in my head were pretty accurate. Anyway, I left there. I walked back to the bank, still no money. And they said there was nothing they could do. So I left, and I was now feeling, should I go? It was Murphy's Law. I always used to bring food with me. As I said, I lived in a different area and I stayed the whole day in this area because I gave 2 shirim. I always used to bring food with me, but that day I decided there's so many kosher delis and things available, I'll buy some food. So I had no food with me. I thought, should I quickly run to the shops and get something? But I'd only be able to get rubbish there, like some chocolate or something like that. I thought, no, let me just get to the police station. The sooner I get to the police station, the sooner I can get back to the area where there's food and have food, rest before my next SHIUR. Anyway, I get to the parking and I pull out my ticket to pay for parking, and my ticket's not there. Now, I know that I had the ticket because when I got out my car, I'd said to myself, I'm in a flap. I'm anxious. It was, it was quite scary. I was fine, but my car had really been smashed badly. And I'd said, make sure to put the ticket in my purse, because if I don't, it will go and land somewhere in my bag, and I'll be hunting all over for it. And I couldn't find my ticket. So I said, you know what, let me just go to the car, sit down, I'm exhausted. I went to my car, turned my purse inside out, couldn't find my ticket. And I looked and looked and looked. I thought to myself, well, maybe when I pulled out my ID book at the bank, it dropped, but it was now 3:30 already. It had been hours that I'd been doing this, and the banks were closed because they closed. I thought, there's nothing I can do. I'm going to have to go back and pay for a lost ticket. So I went back, and I looked, and it was 110 Rand for a lost ticket. And I said, this is ridiculous. So I buzzed to speak to someone. And I said, look, I can't find my ticket. I said, but you can see from my iPhone, I said, it's got a GPS. You can see that what time I came in to the waterfront. And instead of doing anything, they just clicked me off, and up on the screen came 110 Rand to pay. So I was now annoyed. I went back to my car. I turned my purse inside out again, and my bag inside out again. And I just started to cry. And I said, Hashem, I know I've got bigger fish to fry. And I did. I was actually, the type of cancer I had is not the type of cancer that they'll ever say I've gone into remission. But B'derech HaTeva, there was a a period of time where I was at most risk for a recurrence, chas v'shalom. And I was now in that time, and I actually had a full body CT scan was coming up in a fortnight. So trust me, I knew that there were bigger things to worry about than a lost parking ticket. But I was crying, and I said, I know that. And I said, Hashem, it's not about the money. I said, if I find the parking ticket, I'll donate that 110 Rand to tzedakah. I said, Hashem, I'm just feeling so alone right now. I'm just feeling so overwhelmed right now. And I sat in my car in this underground parking lot for about 10 minutes, just speaking to Hashem, just telling him how I was feeling, why I felt so alone, why I was feeling so much overwhelmed. And at the end of 10 minutes, I really felt so much better. And I said to myself, there's nothing I can, that's it. Get up, let me just go, and I'll have to pay the 110 Rand. As I got out the car, I thought to myself, I was in such a flap when I left the car. Maybe even though I said to myself, put it in my purse, maybe I dropped it. And I got down, I bent down, and there under the car was my parking ticket. What's important, though, is that hug that I got was not actually finding the ticket. The hug, the intimacy, the love, the connection was the fact that you and I, wherever we are, for whatever we want, from finding up not just a parking ticket, from finding a parking space to waiting to oncology results, can turn around and speak to Hashem. Hashem is nothing too small, nothing too big for Hashem. Hashem is intimately involved in our lives. He's with us all the time. The finding the parking ticket is a lovely ending to a story for a shiur, but it's not the hug. I was not alone, whether I could see it overtly or not. Anyway, who was it for me to dictate that it was better to donate the money to tzedakah? I mean, the Hashem decrees our panas on Rosh Hashanah, and the owners of the parking lot with the waterfront also need to make a parnasa. Or maybe I was meant to. I mean, as I said, I was in a bit of a flap because I could have been, chas v'shalom, I could have been very, very, very badly injured, if not worse, with that car. And maybe it had been decreed that with that accident, maybe it had been decreed that I had to have a certain amount of angst that day, of going through trouble that day. But because of the merit of going off to teach Torah, I wasn't injured in that accident, but I had to still have some of that frustration. So Hashem had said, let's make Devorah feel like an idiot because she lost her parking ticket. So that's what we have to know. We have a connection. Today, it's when we do, it's tefillah, it's speaking to Hashem, and it's beautiful, but it's often covert. But at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, this connection, the hugs that we felt from Hashem were palpable. And that's what we lost. And also there's a PS. Now, again, I'm hesitant to tell this PS because my point of the story is this hug, is that this connection and the love that I felt from Hashem that day when I was just speaking to him. But I don't want you to spend the rest of the shiur wondering, like, what happened to her money? So even I'm going to tell it because, and as I said, my hesitation is because often we find with these emunah stories, with all these happy ending. And it's true. Stories do always have a happy ending, but it's not necessarily that we're going to see that happy ending in our lifetime. And so if we base our emunah in always seeing happy endings in our lifetime, then our emunah can be shaky. But I'll tell you what happened. So what happened to the money? It took a few days, but I was correct. The person at the bank didn't know what she was talking about, and she did have to, it couldn't be done with an EFT. It had to be done with a check. So the money was still in my bank account. And I went to the manager of my bank to complain and say that they need to train their staff better. And she said to me, but why? She said, why did you want to move to that investment? She said, we're having a Black Friday special today. So I invested my money for another year at a much better rate than I would have happened had I managed to invest it at the other bank. But anyway, so sometimes we see that the connection, the love and the hugs are clear in this world too. But getting back to the Maharal, he says, if that's the case, do you know what the Greeks wanted to do? They said, you think you're unique? You think you have special bonds with Hashem? You think Hashem sends you hugs? Not true, and we will prove it to you. Shortly after receiving this special bond, this covenant and bond with Hashem, when we received the Torah, when the Ten Commandments, you bought an egel, you bought a golden calf. You rejected, you broke that bond. You're not unique. And it's true, and to an extent that the antithesis of this unbreakable bond was the golden calf. And yes, it sorely tested this connection. Chazal say it was like a bride being unfaithful to her husband under the chuppah. And it's only because Moshe prayed and pleaded on the nation's behalf that we salvaged, our relationship was salvaged. And then when Moshe goes up for 40 days for the third time, the Jews themselves, they plumbed the depths of their hearts and they recommitted and they renewed their commitment to Hashem. But the Maharal explains that the reasons the Greeks had them to write the statement on the horn of the ox is that they wanted to remind the Jews of the Chet HaEgel, of the sin of the golden calf, because the Greeks believed that sin had stopped the Jews from being the chosen people. The Greeks wanted us to write for ourselves that we've got no special relationship with Hashem. They wanted us to believe this, because just as if you remember in the Purim story as Haman wasn't happy with everybody bowing down to him when Mordechai wasn't bowing down to him. The Greeks were not satisfied with spreading their wisdom to the world, because just with their wisdom, they wanted their wisdom, not the Torah, to be the highest wisdom that any person could reach. The Greeks wanted to destroy the spiritual qualities that make us unique. And this aspect of the Greek exile is what made it so dark, is what made it so dangerous, because all the other exiles were primarily, it was about our physical survival. They were physical exiles, but the Greek exile was a spiritual one. Okay, it endangered the very essence, the soul of the nation of Israel. And that's why the Greek exile is associated with darkness. Says the Maharal, so they said, you might have once had a special relationship with Hashem, but you broke the bond and you're now one of us. Right on the horn of an ox. That ox, the ox is the parent of a calf, of the golden calf. And that shows you don't have a chelek, you don't have a portion, you're just like one of us. So this is a symbolism of the ox. This ox, the parent of the golden calf, proved that we have no special bond with Hashem. Any bond, any link that we might have had has long since been severed because of the sin of the golden calf. So in effect, the Greek strategy, far from oppressing us, okay, because of our connection to Hashem, was to torment us, because they said you don't have a connection with Hashem. If you were, they taunted, if you still had a connection with Hashem, then how on earth would Hashem allow this destruction to happen? This, says the Maharal, is the true motive of the Greeks, okay? They defiled the Beit HaMikdash. They desecrated the holier place of earth because they said they wanted to taunt us. They wanted to say, you're nothing special. You're not unique, they claimed. We've surrendered our spiritual legacy, and to prove this, they embarked on the sacrilegious desecration and defilement of the Beit HaMikdash. The antidote to such darkness, therefore, is a clear and unequivalent divine display about the unique role, our unique spiritual role of Klal Yisrael in upholding and spreading the light of Hashem's Torah in the world. If that was the case, then to have succeeded in the military conquest, to have had the greatest miracle militarily, we would have won the battle, but lost the war. This wasn't a battle for our physical survival. That wasn't what it was about. Our survival was at stake because they tried to take away our spiritual core. Hence the miracle of the oil. The miraculous military victory was not sufficient in illustrating the fully restored connection that we had to Hashem and of our spiritual uniqueness. Says the Maharal, yes, we won the battle, and yes, it was miraculous, it was divinely inspired and orchestrated. But when we'd done that, If we'd stayed at that point, the battle would have been won, but we had been defeated as a nation. We wouldn't have realized our uniqueness. The war for our spiritual survival had not yet been won. So what happened? We went back into the Beit HaMikdash and we found a crucible of oil, of fire, of light, showing the source of something that can be elevated from the physical into something spiritual, to connect it to a spiritual source. It was a symbol of us returning to that spiritual state. Come, I want you to come with me for a few moments. Let's put ourselves back in the shoes. Let's take ourselves back to that time. Day one, they find this little cruse of oil and they light the menorah. Now I want you to remember that many, 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 many Jews had embraced Hellenism. And perhaps they were even thinking, should we light? Maybe, is it a chutzpah to light? Maybe they were even feeling some uncertainty, some trepidation. But they lit. Day two, they come and they see it's still a light. So they think, well, maybe it's a fluke. Maybe there was like bad quality control at the oil manufacturing company. So maybe they put in a little too much oil by mistake. Or maybe the fact the company was having one of those 50% extra for the same price. Or maybe, could they dare to think that maybe it was something more? Maybe it is a miracle? Day three, it's still a light. It's not a fluke. It's a miracle. It's showing that we have a special bond with Hashem. It's a hug from Hashem. Day four, can you imagine the mounting excitement? Day after day, showing that we've got this special bond with Hashem, that His love for us, that it hasn't been severed. Day five, can you imagine the fever pitch excitement? Can you imagine the selfies? OMG, LOL. Nothing could serve to warm the heart, to rejuvenate the soul, to reignite our passion for Torah, like seeing that the miracles of the lights of the menorah remaining lit day after day after day. We haven't just won a battle, but we've recaptured the state that we always had, an intimate, loving relationship with Hashem. And Hashem is showing us that if we do the right things at any time, like right now, at the most challenging times, with the greatest jihad against us, and it's not only Hamas that wants to drive us into the sea, we see it, the vitriolic criticism in the media, in the governments around the world, and university campuses, that we are even more special when we return to the source of our uniqueness. We'll end with a true story from the Australian countryside that highlights this. In the early 1900s, when Jews were trickling in, were immigrating from Europe, a couple moved to Australia. They escaped the persecution and the pogroms of Eastern Europe, and they came to Australia in search of a new identity. They settled in Victoria, and they decided, though, along with settling in a new land, they didn't want anything to do with Judaism. They felt that Judaism shackled them. It was the source of the pogroms, of the persecution, of not being able to make it in life. So they dropped everything. But they also found it was hard to make a living there and couldn't find any employment. So what did they do? They became hawkers. They would travel from place to place and peddle their wares. So one day they set out to go to a country town, Bendigo, and to hawk, and they didn't manage to reach their place by nightfall. And they see that it's starting to get dark. And not only that, the sky's clouding over. It looks as if there's a storm. And they find on the banks of the Campaspe River, they find this a dilapidated drover's hut. It's dilapidated as a wooden shack, and it was left there for people to take shelter. And this is Australia. This is the proverbial middle of nowhere. But rain threatened. They tie up their horse and they go inside to take shelter for the night. And as they settle down, the husband turns to the wife and he says, tonight's first night Chanukah. I want to light a Chanukah candle. And his wife says, you hypocrite, you're so soft. We promised, we said we'd have nothing to do with Judaism. And he says, what's the problem? We're out in the countryside. Nobody's going to see us, which is quite ironic, seeing that the mitzvah of Chanukah is to publicize the miracle. But they have a huge fight. But eventually they agree, and they wait, it gets dark, and he lights a candle. He's crying tears of simcha. She's still frustrated, crying tears of frustration. But they light it, and then they settle their fight, and they go to sleep. About an hour later, they hear a pounding on the door. Now remember, they're in the middle of nowhere. And so he's a bit nervous, but he gets up and he opens the door, and there's this totally soaking, drenched bushranger, and he shouts, he says, get out of here. He says, quickly, get your stuff and get out of here. He says, there's torrential rain. He says, it's all accumulating in the mountains. He says, in less than an hour, this entire place is going to be flooded. He says, quickly, get your stuff, get out of here. And then he turns to them and he says, you were so clever. You were so clever to leave that candle burning. He said, I was here 6 hours ago, but there was no one here. He said, you were so clever to leave that burning. That candle saved your lives. And it did save their lives, because needless to say, they came straight back to their Jewish roots. In fact, that couple was one of the pioneering Jewish families in Melbourne's Jewry. Their descendants are proud members of the Melbourne Jewish community today. We're living in a world that is seemingly so dark, and it's so easy to spend 10 minutes reading the news to get sucked into this vortex of darkness. But we have to know that we are connected to the source of light. And by keeping that connection strong, we can dispel any darkness in our lives. Wishing you all a Chanukah Sameach.
That was so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much. I'm going to just stop the recording, but thank you.
Please.